which is hilarious. Hi, everybody. Hi, hi, hi. Hi. I'd love to know what everybody's smoking and what you're smoking and where you're smoking. I see 8th Bowmanville. I'm from Bowmanville. 8th Bowmanville. I probably went to high school with someone that works there. So Lexie's Lake. I was really upset when the pierogi store sold, but apparently it's still the same. You know what I'm talking about. I know you know. Mary, hi Mary, good to see you. We've got Noah, Cam Jam, Shatterizer. Thanks, Noah. You're smoking the Shatterizer. What do you find the Shatterizer feels like for you? You want to type it, or you can say it out loud. And then we've got makes me motivated, is what Noah says. I like that. You're cleaning today. Okay, that's cool. That's cool. I'm also Vanessa puffing on a collab, Project Live Resin Vape. Bethany's got a rainbow raz distillate infused. Oh, I love that. What brand is that, Bethany? That sounds great. David, what are you smoking on?
It is whatever the newest offering from VCC and Wildcard.
We love VCC.
Absolutely. All their stuff is great.
Just a good group of people also.
And hopefully soon they will have a very cool Farmgate store as
well. Oh, I love the idea of a Farmgate store. No one's like successfully done it yet, so I have like a lot of hope for them, and like it could be so cool.
There's definitely a few. I think New Brunswick has probably done it the best. There's a couple of pretty cool Farmgate stores in New Brunswick. There are a few in Ontario as well. I don't know how much traffic they're getting, but there's a handful. There may be some changes to that. You know, I imagine we will see those regulations getting better as time goes on. There's one here in BC as well, although I think he's having trouble getting the word out.
Who is it?
Oh gosh, put me on the spot. Let me actually look it up so I can get a shout. It's
Doug wanted to do one, but they couldn't. Hi, everybody. If you just joined, please toss into the chat what you are smoking and where you're joining us from. We're just going to wait another couple minutes for some other buds to join, and then we're going to dive kind of right in. But welcome, everybody. Elise, we were joking that Vanessa said in the chat, hi, Elise's back room. So hello, Elise. In your back room. Hi. Cam, you look like is it a giant blunt, Cam, that you're smoking, or is there something special happening here?
No, it's just I believe it was a King super wide from Raw, and it's just filled with homegrown weed from last harvest last year and a little bit of Keith.
I love that. It looks incredible. It is stunning.
Thank you. It is hand rolled.
The best. That is also like that's talented if you can hand roll that, because that's a lot. There's a lot going on there. So, and also the effort that you put in. You really did the time.
I was afraid I wasn't gonna get the time to do it, because I brought my boyfriend to work and then was coming back and traffic sucked and I don't want to miss this check-in. But no, I found that I know some people roll with like two hands. They'll roll it like over in their hands. Typically what I do is I'll use a tip, and I'll use that tip and basically start the roll and have like a J, and then you'll fill it with your flour, and then you'll finish the roll and then tamp it down, add some more flour or whatever, and then go from there. And then you can put whatever roll or whatever crimp you want on the top. This one specifically, they call it like the French style or whatever, where it's flat,
Mm-hmm. I like that. I think they burn cleaner for me.
Yeah, it's not to have all the paper burst up into flame before you've gotten your flour and everything lit.
Totally. I think like I had someone, I see you have a mustache. I had someone describe to me one time that they could only smoke joints that were mustache safe.
Yep, I get that. There's times where once it gets down to your tip or whatever, you'll go to relight it and you'll feel the lighter on the tip of your nose or any closer, and it's not something I like to repeat. I like putting the longer filters in too, because it just keeps the heat away from the mouth, and typically will lead to a cooler smoke as you get down to the roach.
I love this. Natasha, you have your hand raised. Would you like to raise your hand and say a thing? If not, we're gonna start this bad boy.
You're talking to me?
Yeah.
Hey, sorry. Hi, how's it going?
So
Yeah,
good.
I'm just at home today. I'm doing a little bit of school work, but I still wanted to join. And I do have some weed vapes here, but they're good. This one's the tangy,
Tiki Tango.
Tiki Tango, yes. Yeah, thank you. But it's good. I like it, mango.
Yo, we are all obsessed with Tiki Tango. So I get it. But welcome everybody. We are already recording. We are going to dive in. It's also hilarious that I would love, at least if we do a poll one time on like how many of our bud tenders have pink hair, because that was my favorite hair color when I dyed my hair. And I think I look the best in it. And I agree. I think you both look great. And I feel like there's a lot of us that have pink hair. But for today, we are very, very lucky to have David joining us from Stratcann. Last time we had a really great conversation where David overviewed like the difference between federal regulations and provincial regulations, and then we opened it up to Q&A. That video is available for you on our YouTube as well as in the Mighty Network for you to be able to access. It's a great like first dive. If you have not had the chance yet to watch it, please do. It is my job here to moderate and make sure that I am passing along your questions. Elise, the incredible Elise on the High Buds Club team, has also taken a bunch of your questions from the platform that already exist and has passed them off to David. So we're going to be going through and answering those things that you've already asked over the past week or so. While you were asking questions today, though, there are two ways that you can ask a question: by dropping it in the chat and I will get to it and elevate it to David, or you can use the Q&A feature and we will also bring that up. If time allows, at the end, we might open it up to a Q&A where we let people on camera, but often because time doesn't allow, I like to streamline those. So questions go in the chat or they go in the Q&A feature. Of course, at every live PK session or live session, you can be automatically entered to win a free flight to get automatically boarded onto your next flight. So at this time, I will ask everybody to drop their name, their store, and their email address into the chat, just so that Elise can grab someone to automatically win a future flight, which is obviously exciting because we have Lord Jones landing, Carmel landing, and then our friends at Rubicon are launching a 1964 vape. And so that is landing. So definitely you want to get on those. So I am thrilled and excited. And that is my spiel for today. And David, I'm going to pass it off to you to just give your quick explainer, and then we will dive right in.
Thanks, Sabine. Yeah, I am. My name is David Brown. I am the owner of a cannabis news and events company called Stratcann. I believe we're in our 4th year of operation here in Canada, and I've been doing kind of news and regulations in Canada for about 10 years now. And I'm happy to kind of share, my knowledge of the industry with you, and also hear, your questions and comments and what you're seeing on the front line. So I really appreciate High Buds for letting me come in and speak with you guys, and looking forward to just diving right in today.
Okay, amazing. Well, the first question that we have is actually a question that was asked last time that we didn't have a for sure answer for. So David, to recap from last time, why are there no expiry dates on edibles? We assumed that last time, since they were food and other food items have to have expiry dates, why doesn't that exist on edibles?
Right. Yes. So I did my homework on this, and I also talked to a couple folks to try to get my head around the rationale. On paper, the two terms here to pay attention to that Canada has for food products are a best before date and an expiration date. Best before date deals with food products that would diminish on the shelf in 90 days or less, not counting fruits and vegetables. And so there's kind of a limited product array there of those types of things that only have a 90-day shelf life. Cannabis edibles have a shelf life of longer than 90 days, and in fact are required to, just in terms of some of the quality assurance standards, to avoid things like microbials and stuff like that. An expiration date would actually be a lot more strict and really only deals with products that would have, say, their nutritional value diminish over time, or would actually sort of rot on the shelf or something like that. So I think the more applicable term there wouldn't actually be expiration date; it would be the best before date, because you can't really buy any cannabis edibles that would diminish in less than 90 days. That then default becomes a restriction on putting that label on there. So basically, any edible you're buying has a shelf life of longer than 90 days, and therefore isn't required to have that best before date, or what people are sometimes referring to as an expiration date.
Okay, wow, that was literally such an incredible answer. And I did not think you would have to food science us today, but okay, thank you. The next question from Ben. And as I said, just toss all your questions in the chat and then I'll hit them in the Q&A and we'll bring them up as well. But Ben asked in the channel, wow, in the High Buds Club feed, I'd love to see a breakdown of flower versus edibles. And this is really mentioning your article about consumer demographics.
Yeah, so I did a little bit of homework on that question, and I love that question. I wish there were more comprehensive data at the national level. Some of the provinces release that, some of the retailers release that, and there's some commercial agencies that you can subscribe to get those numbers. BC currently has the best quarterly data, and I report on that every time it comes out. In fact, their most recent quarterly report should be coming up in the next few weeks, I think. And what we see are pre-rolls absolutely continuing to gain market share. People, I think, really love the convenience. The other big climber right now is the infused pre-rolls. So people love the convenience of pre-rolls, and people love high THC products. So it's pretty obvious, I think, why infused pre-rolls are really eating into market share. If we're looking at market share in general, dried flower continues to be the dominant, especially if you combine pre-rolls into dried flower. But even just looking at, regular SKUs of dried flower, it's sitting around 40-50%, I think, depending on the market, which is the plurality for those products. Extracts are really eating into that market share a lot. Not only eating into it, but I think also attracting new customers. So it's not just that someone's buying a vape pen and not buying dried flower. It's likely they're buying both, and I'm sure you're seeing that on the retail end as well. And then well below extracts and infused pre-rolls are included in those extracts numbers, which is a big part of why those are building up so much. But obviously vape pens, concentrates, infused pre-rolls. Then well below that, we see edibles. The most popular edible tends to be gummies, and I'm sure you guys are seeing that on your end too. Pretty well below that are the chocolates, and then cookies and things like that, even below that. Topicals, very small percentage, although from what I've seen in BC, at least, there seems to be some evidence that topical sales are increasing a little bit. That might also be that the market's consolidating a bit. I think there's some fewer products than maybe a year or two ago. So maybe, the ones that are outlasting are finally gaining some market share. Anyway, that's, from what I see, that's kind of the overview, where dried flower, especially if you include pre-rolls into that, is the dominant, but extracts will continue to eat into the market. I think a big part of that is there's more extracts on the market in terms of live resin, rosin, hash, things like that, shatter. Prices are continuing to go down, a lot better quality, and I think that's arguably bringing in a lot of consumers from the legacy market who previously weren't purchasing from the legal market yet.
It's an interesting point because about topicals specifically, because I think topicals, I agree, like the market for topicals is so interesting. And what we saw with the last Rubicon flight that we did, or we had topicals included, and all the bud tenders remember this, everyone got the CBD stick, but 60% of the bud tenders had never tried a topical before that participated. And so there's, I think, gaps in some of these categories as well, that there's larger barriers to purchase. Like some of the concentrates, like dabs, they have such a large barrier to purchase that you have to have someone teach you how to use it or try it. And I feel very much it's the same with topicals, because people don't know how much to use, when to use it, what they're like. And it's a category it's a weird category. Yeah. I don't know if that made sense.
Absolutely. I think, I think it will probably always remain kind of a niche market. I mean, most people are looking for something different than cannabis, but I think that your point speaks to the fact that there's probably an opportunity to grow that a bit with more consumer education and easier access too. I mean, if there were ways to purchase those products outside of cannabis stores, we're a long way away, frankly, from any legislative change that would allow for that. But that would be the big shift, is if you could buy topicals, at a pharmacy or something like that.
A long way away. How long do you think?
Well, that's a good question. On the non-medical side, I think a long way away. There, was initially some legislation, some guidance documents that talked about looking at, sort of moving CBD products out of the Cannabis Act to a degree and being able to just purchase them, over the counter. That's taken a long time. And I think the reality is it's taking a long time because it's just not going to happen anytime soon. There's a lot of other issues that are of bigger importance. And when you get into the weeds of the science of sort of separating out CBD and ensuring it has low enough THC product, it becomes this big complicated regulatory issue. On the medical side, though, the most recent report that came out on the Cannabis Act from that expert panel that was doing the 3-year review of the Cannabis Act, one of the things they talked about was medical access through pharmacies. That I'm hearing there is some movement on. I know that it's been in the works for years anyway, so I think we could see some changes there. And so that would be a little caveat to that question is ideally you could then buy it, with the prescription through a pharmacy.
Amazing. Adam brought up a great point in the chat, actually, that like we're also not even allowed to speak to recommendations for some of these items that have like medicinal benefits. So that's also a good point as to like why category for topicals might be low, for example, because you can't even say like it's good for this. You just have to be kind
That's
of
a good
vague.
point. A consumer has to come in sort of knowing why they want to purchase it. And that goes back to the consumer education where they need to know they exist and they need to know what they're looking for beforehand. And I think that's something that, if you could go into a pharmacy, when you're speaking to a pharmacist, they are authorized to talk about those kinds of things. So that would shift that conversation a little bit. And I think it would, present some interesting opportunities where maybe a non-medical retail store could have a relationship with a pharmacy, perhaps, where they could say, look, I can't talk to you about that. I'm not a pharmacist, but our folks across the street here would be happy to hold your hand through that process.
Totally. Tabitha just mentioned in the chat for anyone listening or watching in the future that she's a pharmaceutical chemist and she specializes in cannabis chemistry. So please reach out to Tabitha on the network, help with questions. And I think that that's also an important element is like with legalization, with the industry being alive for so long, people with different skill sets are coming into this industry as well. So we will see like those conversations potentially change because Tabitha can probably very eloquently explain it and legally explain the things that we couldn't explain. So I think that's very interesting.
And there is the only pharmacy of its kind that I'm aware of. There's a place, Pharmacann, I'm getting the name wrong, in Ottawa, that is a cannabis pharmacy that operates. They're fully licensed. They've been able to kind of jump over a lot of hoops to be able to create within the existing model what serves as a cannabis pharmacy. You can look them up on our website. Rahim Dalla is the owner, and very cool stuff they're doing there if anyone's interested in that. And I imagine it sounds like Tabitha probably knows a lot more about this than I do.
No, that's very cool. We have a couple questions, but one of the questions I think is going to segue. So I want you to kind of give us a precursor first. David, I'm wondering if you can kind of talk a little bit about the labeling requirements that are a part of the regulations for Health Canada on cannabis. So we've got like the THC labeling, terpene labeling is not required. We have what is on the labels. Why did Health Canada choose to make the labels that way?
Yeah, great question. And I remember seeing that question. I think I had some points about, maybe mandating terpene and other things like that. And that's something I hear a lot of folks talk about. Requiring THC and CBD is somewhat of an archive, in my opinion, of the medical system. Obviously, those were put in place at a time because that was the argument of, these are the components that a doctor is specifically prescribing. You need, this much THC, this much CBD. I think it's a really long, interesting conversation you could get into of maybe we don't need to have those things labeled at all. Maybe that would shift consumer choices away from thinking, THC alone is the end all be all. But that is the reason for the labeling being like that. In general, Canada took a sort of plain packaging approach. That doesn't just mean black and white, but it means the packaging is really limited to the specific consumer information and not a lot of branded information. In terms of mandating, I think, more things be labeled. I think you would see a lot of industry pushback from that. That's just, a lot of extra costs and logistics. The other side of that, though, is there are lots of producers who do list things like terpenes and, harvest date and packaging date and all those kinds of things. And I think, some consumers are showing them, with their dollars that they want to support that. And I think that we're going to continue to see more of that if consumers continue to buy into it. But yeah, the this goes back to Canada's approach to legalization in general, which was a very strict public health focused approach. And so our packaging and labeling requirements reflect that. So it's, not really looking to make cannabis seem glamorous or exciting. If anything, it's to educate the consumer in the same way that they use, tobacco packaging to educate the consumer. So that's, really what's behind all of that.
I think that's a really interesting point too that you said that is about like voting with your dollars. And I think that primarily in our industry, we're really going to see that a lot of change will be driven by voting with your dollars. And like if consumers want to see those things in the packages, like they're going to have to buy them. Because I think a little known element, and then Cam, I'm going to let you come on camera because I know this was your question. I want to make sure we answered it for you. But a little known element that I think like adds context to David explaining the logistics side of the labels is Health Canada has baked in a lot of weird rules on labels that make labeling literally so logistically complicated. So like they have to be, the words can't be more than 2 millimeters afar from the side of the container or of the label itself. And the yellow thing, the yellow warning, there's actually 7 different ones that have to be rotated evenly on every single SKU. So you have to pre-order them, like buy the package per amount, assuming how much you're going to sell of that SKU. So you can be like, oh, I need to have 50,000 of these that are this one out of the 7 and another 50,000 that are different than the 7. There's a lot of weird things that have been done in the industry that make a lot of labor very intensive for little reasons that I cannot digress into because it's annoying. But I think like the logistics element of a lot of the things that happen in the background really impact the front facing side of like what we see day to day as well, which I think is interesting. But Cam, I would love you to raise your hand. And did David answer your question?
So I do want to preface by saying I really appreciate that little snippet of information you gave beforehand, because personally, I wasn't aware of like the requirement for the space between the end of the packaging and the wording and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's fascinating, and it does make sense that certain producers are locked into, like you said, the litigation and the like just those constraints they have. But as was mentioned previously, with like CBD products potentially being like available in like pharmacy and stuff like that, or just available on the shelf as they're non-psychoactive, with terpenes also being non-psychoactive and having that kind of that health-focused benefit that some consumers are looking for, would that not then be something that Health Canada would be interested in labeling as more research and stuff is done to see if they are in fact, as pertinent to healthcare as people use them for?
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable question, and I could only give my opinion on that. I don't know the direction that Health Canada would take. I think that's more of just kind of a debate point, and I think that you could make a very good argument for why you would want to include those things. You use a key term in there about the research behind that. There is a lot of kind of woo around some of those things that you have to be able to actually prove cause and effect if you're going to talk about these things. Given Health Canada's approach and the fact that we do list THC and CBD to 0.00, it wouldn't surprise me if they could be convinced to require all of those other things. It looks like Tabitha has an interesting point here. HC is currently open to any research. Okay, yeah. So any research that industry wants to provide that can connect cause and effect. That said, I've heard, some producers say, do we really want to do that research? One, because we don't know the direction it'll go. And two, speaks to Sabine's point that, that's just going to be added logistics for industry. And so while there might be some consumer interest in those kinds of things, a lot of time industry is looking at it from a logistical standpoint, and they're looking for, fewer requirements, not more requirements. But you bring up an excellent point, and I think in an ideal market, it wouldn't even need to be mandated. Consumers would just be purchasing products from producers who were giving them the information they want. And one little side note, early on, I remember in the first couple of years, and the sort of misinformation that would go around Twitter and all these other things about what could and couldn't be done. And I remember people constantly saying, Health Canada says you can't list terpenes, you can't list this and that. that was never true. And what we've seen is that as certain producers who see the importance of that and understand there's a consumer demand for that, they're meeting that consumer demand. So I think that speaks to, and I think we're at a point now in the industry where a lot of that misinformation has died off. But oftentimes when people are talking about what can and can't be done, it's not what the regulations say, it's just the realities of the market. There were, initially there were people saying you couldn't use glass. The reality was producers were choosing the types of products they were packaging they were choosing based on cost and logistics. And we do now see, some producers using glass, and that wasn't because of any sort of regulatory change.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Cam. What a great question. I think a lot of these things we'll see happen parallel path with like the market. I think it's also really interesting in the future for the conversation to be around like botanical terpenes if anything's added in an infused pre-roll. I think like that's a very interesting space and place that like infused pre-rolls have such a higher percentage of things often that I think it would just be nice to have the transparency. Tabitha, you have your hand raised. I would love for you to come on and ask it. And then if not, I will move on.
I just wanted to bring up one point, and that was that Cam had said about like non-psychoactive compounds like CBD, and then with terpenes, that beta-caryophyllene is actually a terpene that works on our CB2 receptors and so can be considered psychoactive.
There you go. Okay, this is Tabitha. This is why you got that pharmacy specialization. Because you're right. Thank you for that note. David, I have a question about consumption in general, but I'd like, before we get into the question, I'd love if you can kind of give some vibes as to why, when the regulations were being built the first time, why outdoor consumption was not allowed, or consumption lounges were not allowed. Why were they not allowed from the beginning?
Well, I would ask which, are you referring at the federal level or at the provincial level, or?
Adam is asking legal consumption levels. Legal consumption lounges, sorry.
Yeah, generally speaking, and I'm a bit of a Debbie Downer here. There are a lot of people who tell me I'm wrong and are trying to change the rules to make it possible. But the issue in terms of internal consumption spaces, and we're talking about combustion or vaping, really comes down to often provincial and municipal rules. If a business wanted to open an indoor smoking lounge, there would likely be quite a few hurdles they would have to jump through to be able to make that happen, if they could make it happen at all. So I would say that it's not really about any restrictions in terms of the Cannabis Act, although there are some restrictions in the Cannabis Act about activities that can happen inside a production facility or inside even a retail facility. Generally, that's at the provincial level. And then when you break it down even further in terms of smoking bylaws and things like that, it often comes down to the municipal level. So there are a few examples of people who have made it work. Lit Research in Toronto is a great example. They have a special license from Health Canada that allows for basically human sampling or organum, or I forget the right. I have a feeling Tabitha knows the term, but anyway, what allows people to sample the products, and so they're able to do that in there. But to satisfy all of the municipal requirements that Toronto had, they had to install quite a bit of ventilation and things like that too. So even though Health Canada gave them this special permit, there were still a lot of municipal rules and hoops that they had to jump through. Here in British Columbia, they recently changed the regulations to allow cafes and other businesses like that have a smoking patio to now allow cannabis smoking on that. But that's another example where when you actually call around to a lot of these businesses, they don't have smoking lounges in the first place. And on top of that, a lot of these cities that they operate in have bylaws that prevent any kind of smoking like that. So long story short, it's not really about any federal limitations. It comes down to a lot of the smoking bylaws, same reason that you don't see indoor tobacco smoking in a lot of places these days. That said, the research I've done, it's been interesting to see the differences. Where I live in British Columbia, smoking is pretty looked down upon. So there's a lot of restrictions even at the provincial level. I was looking at places in Alberta or Saskatchewan where there were bylaws specifically disallowing cannabis because otherwise you could still smoke in bars and coffee shops and things like that in some of these places. So, find a municipality that's willing to work with you and go from there. But I think the reality is you're going to be a lot more likely to see, combustion consumption zones to be in spaces that are outdoor. In BC, that would mean a roof but no walls, or I believe only one wall. Yeah, anyway, that's what that comes down to.
Amazing. Okay. Wow. What a thorough answer. I think it's always really interesting to hear like of the differences between the federal versus provincial. Someone asked in the chat though, and I just wanted to be really clear about it. Those were smoking laws. So was that related? That covers all smoking. Like I could be smoking my peppermint that I'm drying. I don't know. Like is smoking laws all smoking?
Yeah, that's a good question. In British Columbia, for example, the rule previous to this rule change was at the provincial level allowed certain cafes and restaurants and things like that to have a tobacco and vaping smoking area a certain distance from their business. It could be direct connected. There had, windows had to be closed, blah, 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 had to be, fully outdoors so that it was fully ventilated, but cannabis was specifically not allowed. The rule change was they said, okay, now you can do cannabis there as well. So it specifically says tobacco and cannabis. If I rolled up and wanted to smoke my chamomile cigarette, would I technically be breaking the law? That's an interesting question. I don't know.
What a time to be alive. A question that I want to chat about next. And is there anything else in the test? Oh, Tabitha said it was, I'm never going to be able to pronounce this, Tabitha, but that word that we were looking for earlier is organoleptic testing.
Organoleptic. Thank you.
What does organoleptic testing mean?
Oh, geez. Tabitha?
Organoleptic simply means that you're using your organs for the sensory testing. So that could be visual, tactile, it could be aroma, it could even be taste. But you're not supposed to, by Health Canada's rules, talk about the effects.
Right.
Amazing. Thank you.
The consumer can, but the person, right.
Oh, what a time.
I think, am I right that they can't ask how it makes you feel? Is that right, Tabitha?
That's correct. They can't ask you things like, how high are you? Do you like the effects they would have, or you have to be just a little bit cautious when you're referring to those kind of terms. So you can say things like how you are feeling, but not saying like, are you feeling this high or this kind of high?
Gotcha. Tabitha, are you aware of any other locations that are operating in the same way that lit research is?
Previously, Anandia Laboratories in Vancouver did do some of that. They closed down a couple years ago, but many LPs do have their own human research and research and development licenses.
Yeah, I'm aware of quite a few of those licenses. I just wasn't sure if there were any other, Lit's taking a pretty consumer friendly, what we often think of, I think, when we think of a, consumption lounge.
Well, questions that we have that are next. Thank you so much for that great overview. Amazing. I'm thrilled that you're here, Tabitha, and I'm going to ask you many questions. So sorry you've just put yourself in a fire. But we've had a few questions, and this came up last time too, about store displays. And before we get into like answering and talking about store displays, David, I wonder if you can explain kind of like why the regulations blocked store windows to begin with. Like what was Health Canada looking to prevent by asking that all stores be blocked?
Awesome question. I think this calls back to my previous point about sometimes people misinterpreting. Those are provincial interpretations of federal regulations. Health Canada has been very clear for a couple of years now, telling the provinces that's not how we interpret our regulations. To be fair to the provinces, what they're doing is they're reading the federal regulations that say no one outside the store should be able to see any sort of cannabis stuff inside of the store. The intent, what Health Canada says, look, our intent with that is like, we don't want, flashing neon signs, and you don't want weed right up in the window where kids can see it. But, if you have to like peer through the window to see it through the glare that someone's purchasing some cannabis, that's not our intent. Initially, most of the provinces read the more strict interpretation of, okay, this means we have to require these window blocks. The example that proves this, I think, two examples that proves this is Alberta and BC have rolled back those rules now. I don't know why Ontario hasn't. That's a great question, and maybe I could look into that and ask some other folks why they haven't yet. But yeah, there's Health Canada's rules were about being able to see into the store. Health Canada's own interpretation is that doesn't mean blackout windows. That just means you can't have stuff right up there that's going to be super attractive to young people or something like that. we now, because retailers have pushed back, we now have had at least 2 provinces say, okay, fair enough, we were over interpreting that aspect of the regulations. But that, in terms of Ontario retailers, I would keep asking your province why, and pointing to BC and Alberta. They've done it. Why won't you let us do it?
Thank you. That was so concise as always. Because yeah, we've had a few people like mention that like in Ontario they're allowed to take things away, and now they've had to put site blockers back up. So I think there's a lot of like nuance, and you're totally right. I know in BC it was oh my god, what are those cops called that are essentially the cannabis police?
The BCU or Community Safety Unit, CSU.
Is it those guys? Are those the ones that do whatever?
Yes,
they
do
regular
the educational visits and things like that.
those guys. Yeah, they were the ones that we heard from different people that worked there that they all had different interpretations of the regulations as well. So I think there's like, as we're in this industry all new together, we are interpreting things differently.
Yes. And, like you say, it's a big part of it is new. I mean, you have inspectors who are dealing with a whole new set of regulations that they might be doing this in another sector their entire life, but now they have these different rules. Being overly cautious in the beginning is, having strict interpretations in the beginning makes sense. That's people sort of covering their back. But, once people see the sky isn't falling and they hear enough pushback from industry, the thing I always tell anyone operating in this space who's dealing with provincial and or federal regulations is, don't take an inspector's word as gospel, and be willing to sort of politely push back and know the regulations yourself and know how to ask the right questions, because you see examples of that all the time. I see it on the federal regulation side. We used to really see that many years ago before, and when the industry was much newer. I'm sure at the provincial level as well, different inspectors are going to have different interpretations. So being willing to push back on those, know what the regulations actually say. If they come back and tell you, you did this wrong, my first question is, can you show me which part of the regulations you're referring to? Because regulations very rarely are that specific. It's about interpretation.
Yeah, I think that's like an interesting thing. And Leslie just put in the chat that like a few of her stores have been robbed. Her store's been robbed a lot. And we've heard that a lot across the network as well. So I'll be interested to see if like this ends up being a staff safety conversation, as well as like having the windows blocked is actually just not safe for staff. Like there's other rules in other industries that have things like that. When I worked in normal retail, we had to have 2 people working at any given time. So I do think there's like an element here of that. So I would push back when you can and where you can, and use your tools and resources. We have a lot of great bud tenders in the chat that like can be able to advocate and tell you who to reach out to, when, where, how, and why, and just be a support system.
And that's been the argument that BC and Alberta, the government, the industry made. And then when they changed the rules, that was part of the language that both of those provinces used to justify the rule change, was it's about, the safety of those retailers. So again, just, always look at what those provinces are doing and point Ontario and any others in that direction, I would say.
Amazing. Well, thank you. I just want to give us a time check for everybody that is with us. We've been here for about 40 minutes, which is amazing. So we're going to go for like another like 5-10, answer any additional questions that come through. I have 2 questions that were asked in the feed that I want to answer, but if there's any other questions that you want to drop in the chat, please drop it in the chat. And so David, we're seeing more and more things come out with like higher THC percentages across the board, whether it's infused or flower that's apparently 40% without infusion, or like new versions of edible things, not necessarily edibles, but edible things. We talked a little bit about this last time, but do you think there's any movement on the scope for changing the limits and equivalencies?
No, I think this was asked last time too, and so I won't belabor the point too much, but that doesn't mean I want this to be the case. But the reality is, Health Canada continues to take a very strict public health approach to this product. If we look at the recent report that I was referring to earlier, they also supported maintaining the continued 10 milligram limit. I was disappointed to see that too. I really think that there's an opportunity for compromise of maybe 50 milligram limit or something like that, and as a trial or something. But unfortunately, Health Canada continues to look at this from the perspective that raising that is a public health risk. So very little chance anytime soon, I'm afraid.
Thanks, David. I wanted to call out really quickly, Ben, we asked your question first. So sorry, you're going to have to rewatch this video to get your answer, but we asked your question first and it was a great answer. It was great. So thank you for starting us off. The last question that we had that kind of came in that I want to go back to too about regulations, and I think is kind of like an interesting point for all of us, is celebrity endorsement rules. So why did Health Canada build the celebrity endorsement rules before launching? Like why?
Same thing, public health, public safety, strict public health approach. Ensuring packaging and marketing is not appealing to young people, and having, celebrity endorsements is something that is seen as, too easy to get into the realm of sort of appealing to people. So you have to remember Health Canada's looking at this from a very stodgy public health and safety perspective. That their perspective is not how do we grow this industry. Their perspective is how do we rein in an industry that's selling a product that has, from our perspective, harms to public health. So having, the Trailer Park Boys on a label crosses the line in their opinion.
Right. It's all really about, like, if we go back, it's always just about the protection of youth.
Yep.
They don't want to have anything that could be potentially seen as exciting by a child.
Yep.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see if other countries adopt like our regulations. I really see that that's what we're seeing already, but the States is a wild beast.
It makes sense that Canada, we'll kind of get into the big picture here, but I can definitely argue for why I think the approach Canada took was important, especially as the first sort of G7 nation in the world legalizing. There was a lot of political pushback domestically and internationally, and so I think taking that strict approach to be overly cautious and ensure there were not any negative, accidents on the road or increase in, young people, using cannabis or going the emergency route. And now other countries around the world have an opportunity to look at this and say, okay, we don't need to go that strict. And that's what a lot of myself and many others, when we're talking to these other jurisdictions, are saying, look, you don't need to go this strict. You can see how we kind of did, some overkill here, and here. Maybe you can roll that back a little bit. When you look at New Zealand, New Zealand had some proposed regulations a few years ago that ended up not going anywhere, but came close to being going to a vote essentially. And they were deeply informed by Canada, but you could see many places where they're directly addressing what they felt like was overbroad in terms of Canada's approach. So and Canada will also, and has been over the last 5 years, lowering some of the regulations, making things a little bit easier. I think this, I keep wanting to say task force report, this expert panel report that came out recently, everyone should read it. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in there that can give you a good perspective in terms of what the public health officials are thinking when they're looking at regulations. And there are a lot of calls for, some changes there and some streamlining things there. And I think we're at a point now where the industry absolutely needs it, or you're going to see a lot of these businesses going under. But, the big ticket things like the 10 milligrams, any changes that would maybe increase the glamour of cannabis or increase usage in significant ways, I don't see changing. I would love to see maybe the possession limit raised to something a little bit more reasonable, so that consumers don't have to choose between buying an ounce or buying some other stuff at the store. Maybe there's an opportunity to push there, as opposed to that 10 milligram limit. I know there's some changes. Some folks are pushing for some changes to the topical regulations. We were talking about topicals earlier in terms of the equivalency there, so that people can, again, make one trip to the store and not have to go every day and stay within that 30-gram limit. So we've seen changes before. The beverages limit, they changed the equivalency on beverages a while ago because of pushback from industry. So I think, we'll see, industry pushing back at the edges of those regulations over time. But the fundamentals in terms of being this stodgy, conservative, public health approach will continue.
Thanks, David. In the chat, I just put David's information because David is such a great resource, and the Stratcann resource is such a great resource. So all these things that David's mentioning, like he always posts them with great recaps on their network. So on their LinkedIn, their Instagram, as well as obviously the website. So definitely use the resource that David provides, because there's so much information on the Stratcann website. So I put it in the chat so everyone can give him and his team a follow. By the last thing that I want to ask, though, David, to close us out for the day is obviously, like, we all see these pain points in the industry, and a lot of the questions that we have are because we're frustrated with certain things. So what can we actively do to drive regulation change? Like, what can the budtenders that are on this call, what can I do? Like, what can we do to actually like make the changes happen?
It's a big question.
Yeah.
You know, being informed, you know, there's a lot of documents out here that we're talking about, and often these conversations based around people aren't operating from the source documents. You know, do your homework and really know what the regulations do and don't say, and that's at the provincial and the federal level. I think that's, you know, that way you can then move out from there from an informed standpoint, knowing, you know, when you're going to Health Canada with complaints that are, you know, provincial regulations or vice versa, you know, you're not helping anyone. So understanding what the regulations are, understanding which jurisdictions to engage with, reaching out to others who do know those things and can help you. You know, I get the frustration. There's a lot of challenges with these regulations. We went from a market that was, you know, pretty wide open and unregulated to, you know, the strict public health approach, and we were used to things a certain way, and we want to get there. And, you know, having patience and understanding that, you know, legalization took, you know, decades, right? So changes take a long time and require kind of a long time game plan. So organizations like HiBuds, I think, is a great opportunity to collaborate with others and reach a consensus, so that you can move to places where you can, you know, compose a bud tenders white paper or something like that and present it to the different provincial governments. And, you know, when we're talking about retail, it's almost always your provincial and municipal regulations. So talking to your local representatives about these issues, not always looking at Ottawa. And in politics in general, we tend to think of, you know, the prime minister in Ottawa and these federal elections as the end all be all, but a lot of these things are municipal and provincial issues as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, a lot of the air quotes problems that we have when you're here, what I'm hearing you say often is that it's a provincial or municipal issue, which I think is really awesome. So thank you for that hot piece of gossip. And that concludes our really amazing Q&A with David. Thank you everyone for being here, and I really appreciate everybody. As always, this will be available to rewatch on the network, of course. This video and all of our videos with David, we keep public. So please share them with your friends, share them with your peers. If like your mom is asking you weird questions, like these are great resources, and David's resource as a whole is a great resource just for end consumers. So please like share the good word around, and drive everybody back to David's website, because there's tons of info there. And David, you are my favorite resource in the industry. And my last conclusion is tomorrow we'll have our smoke and sesh. Would love to see everybody there. We're going to be talking about 420 and why 420 was different and felt weird this year. And oh, actually, I have one question that I wrote down for me and I totally forgot about it. David, can you explain the difference between like micros, craft, not micro, big producer, big grower?
Yes, I love talking about this. So at the federal level, there's basically two different types of licenses. You have micros, you have micro cultivators and micro producers or processors, and then you have a standard or just a cultivator and processor. The micro producer is regulated at the federal level, and can, on the production side, can only grow within a footprint of 200 square meters. All of the production licenses have no limit, so you could be 201 square meters up to, you know, 2 million and beyond on the standard side. Craft in Ontario has, you know, Ontario has a specific designation for craft. I want to say it's 10,000 kilograms a year. I'm sure someone in the chat can correct me. You know, that's different. That's in fact much larger than you're going to be able to do with that 200 square meters. So craft is in terms of Ontario, is a provincial designation only. I haven't seen any other real, you know, definitions around craft beyond that. There are some organizations that have tried to start up and come up with some rules. Micro and standard just refers to the amount that they're able to produce in, and by default, in my opinion, reflects more on the craft side. I think, you know, small scale is generally going to have a bit more care into it and, you know, be more representative of that craft side. That said, there are some, you know, plenty of standard producers putting out some amazing products. So, you know, I wouldn't say it's only craft on the micro side. And I've also seen some terrible product from micros too. So in my opinion, support the micros. I love these guys. They're the real small businesses. Find the ones that are doing some good stuff and support them. And there's some great craft product. But good. There's some. I don't want to discount some of the big producers as well.
There is good flower out there from big producers as well, but I think like that differentiation, I'm really happy that you mentioned that, is that micro doesn't always mean craft. And craft is a amount of weed that you are selling. So you can only sell up to or grow up to a certain amount, correct, David? So it's like truly like, oh, we're only going to grow 100.
In terms of Ontario's designation, yeah, whatever the 10,000 kilograms a year. So, there's some mid-sized producers, and that's really I like to break it down. If you have, small within the micro, which is very small, that's like a mom and pop. These are often, only a handful of people running it. And then you have sort of your mid-sized micros that might be up to around 10,000 square feet. And, really that's not that big. And then you have the really big, the big guys that have, multiple facilities and really massive facilities. From my experience, it's pretty difficult to put out a good product in those really large facilities. There's a few doing it, to be honest, but it's hard to do. I think smaller is usually going to be better quality.
And with that, I will say I'm really excited for our Carmel flight that we're all doing together in a couple of weeks, because our friends at Carmel are launching a actually craft live resin vape. They're the first ones to do it. It's like real, and it's actually single input, which is like not even that doesn't exist in the real world. So excited to see that come down the pipeline for all of us. And thank you, David. Well, this will be available to rewatch later. Please, if you have questions or comments, leave them in the members network. We'll drive them to David, of course, and get you those answers. If we have enough questions and comments like we do, we'll book another one of these in a couple of weeks, get you your hot answers. But please follow David and the Stratcann network. And happy Tuesday, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, David.
Bye. See ya.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Oh, I have to stop the call for everybody. Always forget to do that.
All right. See ya.
It kills me every time. Bye.